Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Food, Wine, and Whiskey in Your Own Backyard. I am your host, Rob, and joining me today back on the show for another appearance, and this gentleman is great, is John Fodera. John, how you doing?
Good, man. How's it going? Good to be back.
Yeah, good to have you back. Just so the listeners, John, you've been on a couple times, but just to refresh their memory, people who maybe haven't heard the previous episodes yet, but tell everybody about who you are, Tuscan Vines, what you do. Just give them a little recap of John Fodera.
Yep, sure. I'm an independent wine journalist covering Italy and with a focus on Tuscany, but do cover all parts of Italy, as we're going to talk about, Umbria today. So, all my content goes out through social media and is on my website at johnfodera.com.
Yeah, and johnfodera.com takes you to his website, which is actually called Tuscan Vines, which is a great resource for Italian wines, great resource for recipes that go with the wines that you critique, John, and cover in your articles. And the one thing I like about what you do with wines, we see so many wine critics that will line up a few bottles, take sips of each, give them a grade, and move on, where you really study the wine. I mean, you might taste it that way, but you're also going to taste it with food and taste it at certain times, and you really dive into analyzing these wines to really give them a fair critique.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, and that's, that is the essence of Italian wine anyway, especially the wines we're going to talk about today. I mean, I can't imagine really enjoying wines like Sagrantino-based wines, without food. It just would be, not something I would, think of doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you mentioned it. We are diving into Umbria today, and I'm excited to do this. I think, John, you tell me, when you talk to most people who are, wanting to get into and explore Italian wines, I think Tuscany is probably that big region that comes up initially, with Chianti Classico, Reserva, those, and then maybe jump into Brunello's, but also Piedmont, I think, gets a lot of run too. But these areas like Umbria, there's some fantastic wines made in these areas, and I think they're kind of under the radar a little bit. A lot of people don't know much about them and don't know the wines that are being produced there, which they make some fantastic wines.
Yeah, they definitely do, and you're right. I mean, I think in terms of Umbria, I always kind of think about it as like a poor man's Tuscany. And the first time I ever went to Italy, I spent a lot of time in Umbria after having been in Tuscany. And I was like, wow, it's really not much different, and the town of Cortona and the town of Montepulciano, which sit in Tuscany, but very close to the border of Umbria. So when you cross over, you don't really notice any difference. And, the hill towns are just as picturesque. The food is just as good. The wine can be just as good. And it's just like, when you cross the border and it's, not Tuscany, it's suddenly a lot cheaper. It's like when you have a Napa Cabernet and then you find a Cabernet that's just right across the border
in Sonoma.
Napa,
yeah.
And it's all of a sudden, $50 less, but it's probably just as good. You see a lot of that with Umbria. Definitely.
One thing, I did a little research on Umbria, trying to get a little bit more knowledgeable on this region, never being to Italy. I didn't realize that this is the only region in Italy that is landlocked, does not have part of its border to some coast. That was interesting to me. Yep,
that's right. So they call it the green heart of Italy. That's what Umbria is called because it produces a lot of Italy's grains and wheat and rice, and in addition, obviously, to wine and other crops. But it's kind of like the breadbasket, like Kansas and Nebraska are for the United States. But there's definitely right smack in the middle, like you said. So it's the heart of Italy.
I also heard that it's the black truffle capital of the world. I mean, they produce black truffles like you wouldn't believe.
Yeah, they do, and they have them. They're everywhere. There's a little town. It's called Castiglione del Lago, and it sits on a promontory that juts out into the lake there. And the town is basically two streets. There's like one street in, and then you get to the main piazza, and then the second street takes you out to the fort, which looks over the lake. So then you just turn around and come down the other street that takes you back to the parking lot. And there's shops on both streets, and they sell everything you could possibly imagine from a food group, and all of it is laced with black truffles. You can buy the truffles, you can buy, sausages and soppressadas with black truffle, you can buy pastas, you can buy cheeses, and you can just smell it the entire way. It's really pretty wild. I mean, they're not, super sought after like, Piedmont's, white truffles could be, which are only in the winter. But the black ones they have there are in the autumn and in the summer they get them. So
wow, that's pretty cool. The other thing that I thought was very interesting about Umbria was I read an article that was talking about it was kind of the area they got frozen time because of the salt wars. It didn't get to experience and really take part in the Renaissance that happened in Florence and cities of Tuscany because of this salt war. I guess they obviously lost that battle and suffered because of it.
Yeah, I mean that's what people I think probably don't understand. As a unified country, the United States is actually older than Italy. Italy has only been unified as one nation, I think, for the past 100 and something years. So there was always a collection of different kind of states, and the papal state in Rome was obviously one of the most significant ones. When the Medici family were running Tuscany or Florence, really. But there were always battles between, Umbria and Siena and Montalcino and Montepulciano. That's why all these towns, they all have forts. They're all walled cities, and they're all on tops of hills. That's by design, because that's a great place to be able to defend.
Sure.
From a military standpoint, and to see the enemy coming from miles and miles away.
Yeah,
so
makes perfect sense.
I think the salt war with Umbria was it had a lot to do with the papal states, and of course taxation on salt that the Umbrians didn't like, and although it's kind of steeped in, I don't know if folklore is the right word or if it's just more pragmatism, but that's why in Tuscany and in Italy you won't find any salt in the bread. The bread is almost always unsalted. Now, the real reason for that supposedly is that the Italians will tell you, well, the only reason that's true is because we don't just sit down and have bread and butter. They don't do that in Italy. When they have the bread, they're usually eating it with, soppressata or cheese, something that is already very salty. So that's why they do that. But if you're an American and you've never been there and you go into the restaurant and they put a little basket of bread on your table and you taste it and you're like, wow, this isn't good. It doesn't have any flavor. But it's just, it's a cultural thing, and you have to understand, how they used it.
That's a great point. Well, I didn't know that, and that makes sense though when you talk about pairing it with saltier cheese or meat or something like that. The last thing I want to touch on, just kind of about Umbria and their culture and what they're known for. Apparently, they're very well known for legumes as well, beans.
Yep. Yeah, I had a producer a while back. He had contacted me and said, "Hey, can you taste my wines and write an article?" And I was like, "Sure, I'm happy to do it." And he had his vineyards were right along. They weren't far from that town I just mentioned before, Castiglione del Lago, and we were talking about that. And that town sits, the Lago is lake. So the lake is Lake Trasimeno, and his wines or his vineyards border the lake just to the south of town. But he also produces a ton of white beans, Umbrian beans. And he sent me a bag of those. And it really is pretty artisan product. I followed the instructions on the bag, and it took them, I think, I had to soak them obviously the night before, but I think it took them like a half an hour to simmer and cook. They're really, really hard, but they were, really flavorful. It's definitely a difference when, you're used to a canned bean.
Now, is it a white bean, if I'm remembering right, that's in your bean and shrimp recipe that's on your website?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's what I thought. And man, I'll tell everybody if you go check out, you got lots of good recipes, but that one is one of my favorites. That is a fantastic dish. Big hit when we
Yeah.
had it at a dinner party one night.
Yeah, that is a favorite. Every time I make it, people love it, and people ask me for the recipe. I should put that in one of my newsletters one of these times soon.
Yeah, you should. And I liked it, John, because people here in the States anyway don't think of beans and shrimp as a dish we're going to eat together. They don't put a correlation between the two. And they looked at me kind of funny when I was making it, and people were standing around. We were having a little wine. I'm telling them what we're making, and they're like, "Really?" And once it got done and served, I mean, it got gobbled up pretty quick, and everybody was like, "Okay, where'd you get that recipe? That's fantastic." So, I mean, it's just a fun dish for that reason as well. It kind of throws people off with beans and shrimp. What the hell are you doing? Beans and shrimp.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So that was
Yeah,
fun.
kind of like a surf and turf, right? I mean,
Yeah.
poor man's surf and turf. It probably is. The Central Italian food. They call it peasant food, and maybe there's a little adaptation there because I wouldn't imagine they get shrimp too often because that wouldn't be inexpensive. But historic now, of course, they do.
That seems to be, you tell me if I'm wrong, but that seems to be kind of the way it is throughout all of Italy. I mean, to me, what I find the more popular dishes are what were these simpler kind of what ingredients we have, 2 or 3, 4 poor man's foods like the four pastas of Rome's, things like that. These beans and shrimp. Things they could just get their hand on. They were simple dishes, but today we look at those as kind of the staples of Italian eating.
Right. That's right. I mean, everything in Italy, has crazy historical stories behind it, and whether it's folklore or, like you mentioned, the pastas of Rome, you start with cacio e pepe, right? And that's just pepper, cheese, and pasta. So the legend there is they used to have a hard cheese and they used to have the black pepper. And the shepherds, would go up into the hills, with their sheep and their goats and have no way to cook. So they used to pack those two things in their backpacks because it wouldn't spoil. It didn't need refrigeration. And then they would make, the pasta up there, with water. And that's what they had, pasta, cacio e pepe is pepper and cheese. So then if you have that and you throw eggs into it, you get carbonara. And if you have that and you add guanciale and you add tomato, then you have amatriciana, so all those, they're all kind of, one mother group of pastas. But they always have, historical legendary tales behind them.
Yeah, and I think that's great. I think that's something I really enjoy about the culture and the history of Italy is learning all these kind of things about the country and their culture. All right, John.
And even still today, the Italians, they're still very much using what's in season, and now I don't know if that's because they just don't, get access to the things or if it's just the way they prefer to do it. But I mean, when I was in Italy, the first time I ever went, obviously it was summer, and, I was curious, to taste the broccoli rabe that they have there and compare it to here, which is broccoli rabe is traditionally a winter vegetable. And when I was a boy, my mother always used to make it during the winter. And I never realized, back then it was like, oh, we don't have that in the summer. It isn't in season. So when I was in Italy, no chance to find it. There was nowhere you were going to get it anywhere where I was because it's a winter vegetable. We had peas. It was, late spring, early summer. We had peas, zucchini were everywhere. I mean, in every dish, zucchini, and almost every way you could cook it, sliced, sauteed, fried, with the flowers, only the flowers. We got sick of zucchini, frankly, but
yeah, I bet.
That's just how it's done. That's just how they eat.
Well, we'll make a little tease on Rome. Maybe at some point we'll cover that area, Lazio. Did I say that right? How do you say that region for wine?
Lazio.
Lazio. I remembered when I was kind of looking at that region as well. For a while, Italy almost lost pasta. It got to a point where they didn't have any more wheat to make pasta, and I think that'll be a fun story to cover when we cover that region. That was interesting to me. Didn't realize that, being such a staple of their cuisine, to realize that one period of time, not that long ago, they almost lost that for good.
Yeah, I can't imagine that either,
Yeah.
frankly. But
All right, grape varietals of Umbria. That's what we're here for. We're going to talk about the wines. I think it was great to give a little background on that country, let people kind of get familiar with what that little area is all about. But we're here to talk about the great wines that they produce, and there are some really good wines that come out of this region. So, grape varietals, John. Let's start with whites.
yeah,
Um,
so the I think the biggest white wine that you'll get in Umbria is Orvieto. Yeah, so that's the DOCG name of the area where the whites come from. Um, there's a great wine. They're a little bit hard to find. I think here in the U.S. because I think it's a little bit difficult for people to kind of grasp. But the big producer Antinori has a really nice estate in Umbria called Campo Grande, and they make a very reliable Orvieto. So Orvieto is just Orvieto Classico, kind of like Chianti Classico. It has its defined region, and it's based almost entirely on the Trebbiano grape. So now that's not, it may or may not be the same thing as a grape that you would know as Trebbiano Toscana. There's different kinds of Trebbiano. Umbria is, I'm sorry, not Umbria. Orvieto is based solely on the Trebbiano grape.
oh, it is. Okay, I thought it was made with the Grecciato grape.
Grechetto.
Great. Okay. I'm going to destroy these pronunciations.
It actually, I don't know if that's the case. Things may have changed.
Yeah.
I can't even tell you the last time I've had an Orvieto. I could probably find one if I looked, but it really is kind of amazing, that they're not. I guess the only thing I could say to explain it is it's probably they're destined for mostly local consumption.
Yeah, that's kind of what I found in kind of looking into them was that they're locally and they do send a lot to Australia, which it seems like Australia gets a lot of European wines.
Really?
Yeah, it seemed that way. Anyway.
Yeah, hey, I guess. I mean, all they have down there is Shiraz, right? And you get sick of drinking that after a while.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, okay, so Trebbiano Spoletino. Do you know that one?
See, that's what I'm saying. That's another one.
Okay.
Now that is Trebbiano Spoletino is a much more, I'll say, substantial grape than Trebbiano Toscano. I mean, they're all the Trebbiano grape, right? So they're all within the same family. They're just different kind of clones. Trebbiano Spoletino is the grape that's responsible for Tabarini's white wine called Ad Armando. And Ad Armando, if your listeners want to grab that is regularly rated Tre Bicchieri by Gambero Rosso. It's a wonderful, wonderful white wine, and it's even a little age worthy. I've had whites Ad Armando with Giampaolo Tabarini a couple times that were 5, 6, 7 years old. So you don't even really think about that when most people, white wine, drink it young, and that's fine, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Because there's always, the next fresh vintage, on the way. But if you buy a few bottles and you stick one away and you kind of forget that it's there, then I think, maybe you'll have a pleasant surprise, 2, 3, or 4 years down the line.
That's cool. Now, when I did my research, John, I found that those were the only 2 white varietals grown in this area, in Umbria.
Well, I think those are probably the 2 major ones that are responsible, for Orvieto, and B, I think your Grechetto is also in there, which is used. Yes. Grechetto is usually I think is usually blended, but those are not, Umbria, probably to a lesser extent than Tuscany, is really not known, for their white wines.
Okay, they're all about the big reds that they have.
I think so. I mean, I don't, even up until a couple of years ago, you don't really even think of Tuscany, when you don't really think of white wines, but I think Vermentino has kind of had a renaissance. Vernaccia di San Gimignano has had a renaissance, and there's still also, some pretty pricey Chardonnays that are grown in Tuscany. But it's just not something that people, typically think of.
Yeah, and you just gave me a bit more information. I did not realize any Chardonnay was grown in Tuscany.
Oh yeah, there was one that I just reviewed on my last Tuscan Snips article. Had an Italian Chardonnay in there from Tuscany.
Oh wow, is that more towards the coast? I'm guessing they're growing that.
It wasn't toward the coast. It was way up north in Chianti Classico. The wine, but very, very, very high elevation vineyard, so it stays very cool.
Yeah.
And then you also have even Sauvignon Blanc there as well.
Wow. Okay, I did not realize that either. We like the Vermentino.
Well, what do you call it? Tenuta di Ornellaia.
Yeah.
Yeah, they make a very pricey Sauvignon Blanc. I mean, it's probably like $80 or $90.
Really?
Yeah.
So I'm guessing at that price, it's age worthy.
Well, I don't know. It's a long time since I've tasted it. I mean, I think it would probably be age worthy. I've never put one away.
That's awful expensive. I know some high end Napa producers that they get into the $40-$50 range, and then that's pretty pricey. But $80 for a Sauvignon Blanc, that's
steep.
That's real steep.
Yeah, I mean, again, if you're talking about something like that, I'd rather spend the money on, you could almost get 2 bottles of Brunello for that money.
Yeah, exactly. 2 bottles of that, or if you want to stay in this region, you can get to some of the red wines they offer that are big and bad.
Easily.
Yeah. Well, that is there anything else in the whites that you want to, inform people on or let them know or something that we need to touch on before we move to these red varietals?
No, I think it just would be that if they want to kind of get a feel for it, I would definitely try to check out Orvieto Classico. Stick with Classico. There's probably there used to be Orvieto that wasn't Classico. I'm not sure if it is anymore. After it got promoted to a DOCG region, I think that might have gone away. But it's just it's probably $10 or $12, and it would give you and that would be a great wine to have with the shrimp and beans, as a starter course, just something like that. Very simple.
That's great information, and I that's the only wine that I've seen that says throughout the U.S. If you're going to find one, you're exactly right. That's the Orvieto is the only one that I've seen where they say you should be able to find this one in the U.S. And that was it. So definitely worth. I'm going to look for it. I'll make the beans again and try that out. That should be pretty good. Let's jump into the reds. What I found, John, was there were 3 main varietals that are grown in this area. One is the godfather of them all, but the Cornetta, the Sangiovese, and then the Sagrantino are the 3 main grapes. Is that about right? Other than maybe just some table grapes that are grown to make table wine or something like that.
Right. No, I mean, I would have to tell you, when you mentioned that to me, I had to go look it up. I had never heard of what Cornetta was. And there really wasn't a lot written about that. I've never heard of that or seen that as a wine. I know they might make it into a sweet dessert wine.
That's what it says. It's typically a sweet wine.
But I mean, they make sweet wine out of Sagrantino too. They call it Sagrantino Pasito. Okay. So that's probably why it's probably doesn't have much of a following. But I think what people may not realize, again, because it's Umbria and they just think, well, we've crossed the border from Tuscany, so now it's different. But the most widely planted grape in Umbria is Sangiovese, ahead of everything else. So the wines, like I said before, they can be similar. If you've got, if you've got and we'll talk about this, as you move it along, but if you, we talk about Montefalco Rosso, that's a great, kind of midterm cellaring wine, early drinking wine that's based almost, it's definitely based in Sangiovese predominantly. And, people just don't realize that, I think.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, my mindset was I was going, okay, well, Sangiovese's there, listed as a grape, but surely they're not trying to compete with Tuscany. I mean, when you talk about Tuscany and Chianti and Brunello, and Sangiovese is king there, and that's where everybody thinks, hey, if you say Sangiovese, where are you getting that? They're going to say Tuscan
Yeah.
wine, right?
Yeah.
But do they use it? So they do make a lot of 100% Sangioveses, or 90% with maybe some 80, 90%, and then they blend it with some other local grapes, or maybe.
Not, not in the, not in the, denominated wine regions. So not within Montefalco Rosso or anything. So if they may make it, like it's similar to the concept of the super Tuscan, right? If the producer wants to make a wine that's 100% Sangiovese, they can, but it may not necessarily fall within the DOC regulations.
Okay, so do you know how they use Sangiovese? Is it for blending, or how are they? Do you see anything really bottled that comes out of Umbria Sangiovese?
In just Sangiovese?
Yeah.
Oh, I think there's a wine. Well, one of the producers is Lungarotti. I think they make a, and there's also Lamborghini, believe it or not,
Oh, really?
which is the Lamborghini family, from the car. So I think they have a wine. No, I'm just looking now at my notes. There's a wine that they make called Trescone. It's 50% Sangiovese, 50% Merlot. So,
Okay.
then there's a wine. They have a wine called Campoleone, which is similar blend. So I don't know if there is a 100% Sangiovese that people would know. They do tend to blend.
So what are the rules? Do you know? And I may be hitting you with something that's tough to answer, but to classify them as a DOC or DOCG, to put them under those, how do they do? Can they use the Merlot, or do these have to go as an IGT?
Yes and no. So two cases if we're going to go there. So there's the DOCG regulations for Sagrantino, and they're simple, right? The bottle that you have that I can see on your screen, Sagrantino Montefalco, has to be 100% Sagrantino, no blending allowed, and it's a DOCG wine, period. That's the end. And unlike, Barolo or Brunello or even Vino Nobile, where there's another tier for a Reserva. So you could have a Brunello Reserva or a Barolo Reserva. No such, language exists for Sagrantino. There's no such thing as a Sagrantino Reserva. It's just Sagrantino, 100% Sagrantino grape. Okay. Grown, in and around the commune of the village of Montefalco, and there's a few other communes there too, near Bavenia, where the grapes can come from. But they're all, very close to within Montefalco. So, I mean, the Sagrantino DOCG is one of the smallest DOCG areas in all of Italy. I think combined, it's about 650 hectares of vineyards. So, I mean, that's very, very small. And I think there are, most of the producers are very small family producers for Sagrantino. I think there's only about 25 or 30. There could be a few more now.
Okay, well, that gets us into Sagrantino, and that's kind of the, like we said, the godfather of the grapes of Umbria. This is what, if you asked what the region was known for, this would be the grape that it's known for, the wines that they produce from this grape.
Yep, it really is. I mean, that's where they hang their hat. Up north, closer to Perugia, is where your Orvieto Classico area comes from. That's, a fairly good distance away from Montefalco. So they've got the white. When you go down, when you start talking about red wines, in my opinion, at least, you are talking about Montefalco and you're talking about Sagrantino. So to be Sagrantino, that wine has to be aged for 36 months, for 3 years before it can be released. And at least 12 of those months has to be aged in oak. And then it can be released. So right now, I think you're seeing, I don't know if a lot of producers made a 14. So that vintage that you mentioned before is a 2013, right? That's probably the most current vintage on the market right now.
Really?
Because what I tend to see, is producers tend to hold their wines even longer than they need to. And, part of the reason for that, I think, is the Sagrantino. It has the highest polyphenols of any wine, even more than Cabernet. And you can age that wine when it's released. The wine can be almost black in color. Super, super, super dark.
Yeah, I was going to have you touch on that because when people are hearing us talk about the Sagrantino grape, just to put it in perspective, this is a big boy. This is a big hitter. The tannins on this thing, thick skinned. When people think about Napa grapes and they think about things like that or Nebbiolo, this is right up there with them. Can age for quite a long time.
Oh, I think it has to age for quite a long time. I probably have combined, across a couple number of producers, maybe a case and a half or 2 cases of Sagrantino in my cellar. And most of them are from 2008 and maybe 7, 8, 10, and 11. I haven't bought anything more recent than that. And, the 8s, there's a wine that the winery is Arnaldo Capri. But the owner now who runs it is his son, Marco Capri. And he makes a wine called Sagrantino 25 Anni, 25 years. It was to commemorate their 25th, vintage. And that wine I've tasted, it can be really great, but I don't know if I've ever really actually had one yet that I thought was at peak, or ready to drink. It is so monstrously tannic. So I know I have the 2008 and maybe even the 2005 in my cellar sitting there. And it's almost like they don't ever go over the hill. So you got to open them. You got to let them age. You got to open them. You got to decant them, make a short rib or a big, nice big steak, char it up. That's where you need to get you need to have some kind of fat to cut those tannins. But they are special wines. They're winter wines. I don't know that you would want to, grab them, in the middle of a July or August heat with a steak, but definitely in the cooler autumn and winter months.
You mentioned that they have to be aged a minimum of 12 months in oak. Do you find, because of the tannins in the grape naturally, that do they go much longer than that? Do you find that producers are leaving it in 18, 24 months in oak?
I think some do, yeah.
Okay.
I think I don't know how much tannins you're going to get imparted from the oak if the producer's using a large barrel. The Slavonian oak, the huge, they're called grande batte. They're enormous barrels. So we're not talking about, barriques here like you would use, and the French would use for Bordeaux. Some producers definitely do that. And if they put it in barrique, then I don't think that they would, hold it in there too long. But there are a couple of wines I've had from various producers that I thought were just way too oaky and charry, that charry kind of flavor.
Yeah.
Not unlike what you might find in like a bourbon at some point. But I think, that you don't want to overdo it with this wine because the grape skin is very thick and it has a lot of natural tannin to it already. So it's a difficult grape to farm for sure.
Okay. And if you're going to tell listeners that, if you're going to find a bottle of wine of Sagrantino from Umbria, it's probably going to be a Montifalco. That's what typically is more common in the States. Because it's a small area, it's small produced, but Montifalco seems to be the one that gets over here and you can find it relatively easily.
Of Sagrantino?
Of Sagrantino. Or there's some other...
That'll be the only place it will come from.
Okay.
Yep.
And tell me this. Let's jump into, from the red grapes, let's jump into appellations and producers. But you mentioned the Caprari family. Arnaldo. How do you
Arnaldo
say it?
Capri.
Capri.
Caprai.
Okay. I was reading an article where he was called the grandfather of Umbria wines of Sagrantino? What's the history there on him? Do you know a little bit about that, or a little bit about him?
I do. I don't know. I didn't know that he was called that, or if that was referring maybe to his father. I don't
Maybe
know.
his father.
I've met Marco many times, and he's actually a really nice guy. I think
And let me just be clear. Yeah, they were referencing Arnaldo.
that makes sense because I think their winery was founded in 1971, and I think it was one of the first to really kind of put Montefalco on the map. And as that, in that sense, they're also I'll say one of the largest. They might be the largest in the DOCG. Now he has almost 400 acres of property, which is enormous, considering some of these other producers, they may have 2 or 3 hectares and that's it.
Wow.
And, but when his father founded the winery, it was only 12 acres. And he really brought it up to the next level. Like I said, he put it on the map. They've become certified biodynamic and organic, and he grew the property from 12 acres to 220 acres of grapes. Although the entire property is almost 400 acres, like I mentioned, but he has beans, forest, olive oil. And just wilderness there as well. So he's got almost 12 accreditations from organic accreditations to the winery, and they've been organic since 1988.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like I said, the article I was reading had mentioned him as being kind of the godfather of Montefalco and putting Sagrantino in that wine on the map somewhat globally, really got it recognized.
I think that had something to do with too. In 2012, he was named Winery of the Year by Wine Enthusiast magazine, and he was on the cover. So there was a lot to do with that. And he's also had his share of Tre Bicchieri awards from Gambero Rosso. So he is a main player in both the Consorzio Montefalco, and also in the region.
Okay, well, let's jump into some appellations. Let's start with the DOC, and I did a little research and found that the ones I've listed, John, and I think I sent you a note, they said these are, if you're going to, there were several DOCs there, but these were like the top 4, the bottom, or let me say it this way. There was 2 whites and 2 reds that I listed. The Montefalco Rosso and the Rosso di Torgiano were the 2 reds that they said if you're going to buy a wine, those are the 2 kind of DOCs you want to buy from. For the whites, it was and I never can say this right, John, how do you say the white grape? It starts with a G? Grechetto? Grechetto de Orvieto. And then the Trebbiano Spoletino were the 2 whites. Okay. They said there's only 2 DOCGs in Umbria. And
the Orvieto and the Sagrantino.
Yeah, and they said, if you're going to buy from a DOCG, it needs to be the Sagrantino di Montefalco.
Right. And again, just to remind people of what it guarantees, just like Brunello, just like any other DOCG, it's not a guarantee of quality, right? Theoretically, it will be if the producer does things correctly. But what it guarantees is that it's coming from within that zone, the Montefalco zone. It guarantees that it's 100% Sagrantino. It guarantees that it's aged for 36 years. It guarantees that it's 12 months in oak out of that, at least out of that 36. Will the wine be good? Who knows? People you can kind of view it as a loose, association of quality wine.
Yeah, it means they followed a process, right? There's a rules
but
for a process.
But at the end of the day, it's every wine is up to the winemaker.
Yeah.
So
I was going to say it matters that the quality of fruit as well. I mean, that's a huge component of, where's the fruit coming from? What's how are their vines? Whatever. All of that plays a factor as well. Huge factor.
Yeah, that's every winemaker I speak to, that they'll always say that, whether it's the vineyard manager or the winemaker himself that's doing that work with the fruit in the vineyard. They always say, when they bring me the fruit to the winery, all I do is not to screw it up.
Yeah.
Bring me the good fruit, and my job is not to screw it up. So you don't make a good wine in the cellar from bad fruit.
Yeah.
It can never happen.
Well, and the other thing I'd say is we never talk about vintages and go, hey, the winemaker this year had a great year, man. He really knocked it out of the park. We say the fruit was so good this year. And
exactly.
Yeah. So
that's exactly right.
Yeah. It's always about the fruit. So who are some producers? Do you, and I know it's not a big region, but when we start talking about, Montefalco, the bottle that I have, and it's the only one I could find in my area. I went to, like I said, four different wine shops, and this was the only one I could find that had any Sagrantino, and this was the only bottle left. Yeah, in Houston, you would think.
On the back of the bottle there, does it say who the importer is?
It is imported by Tricana Imports in New York, Plainview, New York.
Okay, I know Tricana. I'm just surprised you couldn't find Capri. I mean, he's got one of the biggest productions, and I would think you should be able to find that.
Well, like I said, I only went to 4 places. Houston's a big place. I'll have to do a little more research, but I wrote that one down because now you've got me wanting to go try to find that one.
Yeah. So before we go through what I would consider to be, my favorite producers, let's just take one quick step back because we mentioned that Sagrantino has to be the DOCG 100% Sagrantino. So almost every producer, and I would say everyone, but I don't want to make an absolute statement, but I would imagine it's probably true. In addition to making Sagrantino, they make a Montefalco Rosso. Okay, so Montefalco Rosso, it often kind of suffers from a little bit of an identity crisis because people think it's like a younger Sagrantino, right? Montalcino makes a Brunello di Montalcino, and then they have a Rosso di Montalcino. Same grape, 100% Sangiovese, but it's just aged a little younger or aged a little less, and typically from younger vines. So people want to kind of make that leap here when we're talking about these two wines, but that's not the case, right? So Montefalco Rosso, legally, under the DOC rules, is a blend. It has to be a blend. So what it means is it has to be at least 70% Sangiovese. It can't be anything less than that. So that's the primary grape in the wine. And then the producers typically use about 15 to 20% Sagrantino. So kind of gives it a little bit more weight to the wine because, we've talked about how large the Sagrantino can be. But I think the typical blend is 70% Sangiovese, 15% Sagrantino, and then 15%, a lot of producers use Merlot, to kind of soften it. You could use some Cabernet, you could probably use a few other grapes in there too, but I think, those are the ones that are most typical. So that wine,
sounds pretty good.
Yeah, it can be. It can use a little bit, more approachable, a little bit drinkable early on. But it really has, what I would call, it really can be a serious wine. It isn't just thought of. It shouldn't be just an afterthought.
Is it still a year in oak or is it less than that?
I was just trying to look here.
Okay. Well, here I want to make a comment while you're looking that up. I was going to ask you, John, about is Sagrantino blended with anything? And I said, don't ask that. That's a stupid question. That's too big and bold of a wine and stands on its own and known for that region. There's no way they blend that, with something else, but they sure do.
Yeah, I think they use it as a blending grape. They don't blend things with Sagrantino. Right. They blend Sagrantino with things. It's kind of the way. That's probably completely splitting hairs, but I think if we're talking about drinking wines that are local, the people in Montefalco wouldn't really have any um, anything to drink if they didn't have, something that was lighter than, a Sagrantino. You can't just drink Sagrantino all the time.
They'd run out of
Yeah,
the aged quality, drink worthy bottles. They'd be gone pretty quick, so they got to wait a long time. So the Rosso comes in. That's what they drink.
yep.
All right, that makes sense. Did you find anything on the aging?
Now my computer is not behaving here, and I don't have it off the top of my head. I thought I had written it down in my article, and I'm sure I have, but I just can't find it. But I think what I could say is that it's, it's got to be probably, I would say, like 14 months. It's probably something that they don't age it for a long time.
Yeah.
Here we go.
And I was just making the assumption again when we talk about the Rosso di Montalcino, we talk about how it's aged quite a bit. The requirements for aging is quite a bit less. So I was making an assumption, which I shouldn't, on.
No, I mean, I don't know exactly what the DOC regulations are, but what I'm seeing here in just articles that I've written, for example, one of the producers that I happen to enjoy is called Antonelli. His wine is 70%, just exactly what I said, 70% Sangiovese, 15 Sagrantino, 15 Merlot. And he puts it in large oak barrels where it spends 3 months, then 3 months clarifying in cement, and 6 months in bottle before release. So a year all told.
Okay.
So it's meant to be put out earlier on the market. You could really, you make a nice pasta, like what we were talking about before. You make pasta with some black truffles, some mushrooms. The wine would go great with that. You make some, a pork stew or something like that, or even a steak. The wine can go great with that too. You don't need a big Sagrantino all the time. So let's really a great option.
If you were going to think about just hearing that aging process, I'm thinking, when that wine's released, probably 2 to 4 years, 2 to 5 years, you want to drink that wine?
Oh, the Montefalco Rosso?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think, you could definitely do that.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Could you age it? Could you go 10 years on something like that?
I think you could try.
Okay.
But there's also there's a Rosso, Montefalco Rosso Reserva as well designation. So, and that's just
an extra year on the age.
Yep. An extra year on the age.
Okay.
So, I mean, it could or could not be, another level of, better grapes. It could be, but it's probably just a year older, that they've kept it in their cellar a little longer than that.
Well, you shared with me one time, John, a few podcasts back, and I think it's just great for people to really think about and kind of understand when they're talking about aging wine. You have a rule for aging wine, kind of what it should be. Do you know what I'm talking about? Can you mention that again? Or do I need to give you a little more information?
Huh? No, I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Well, aging wine versus and letting it continue to change and grow and develop versus.
Oh, I know what you mean.
Yeah, now you know that.
Yeah. So I always think about it in this way. People want to put wines in their cellar to age them, and the distinction I always make, aging a wine permits kind of natural processes in the wine to occur while you're waiting to drink it. So the tannins soften, the big, almost bold, boisterous fruit will soften a little bit, and then you'll gain those secondary nuances that you may not, perceive when the wine is really young. You might get some, mushroom and earth and leather and things like that. So the differentiation I make is as opposed to a wine simply lasting in the cellar. So in my mind, aging a wine will improve it if that's what you are aiming to do. But you could put, a Napa Cabernet or a Brunello in the cellar and say, okay, this wine is substantial enough and it's stable enough, and if I keep it cool, it's going to last, 5 to 8 years, and it'll still be drinkable. But will it be better? So especially Cabernet. I mean, my goodness, you could keep a Napa Cabernet for 15 or 20 years. It's not going to spoil. If you keep it cool, it's not going to spoil. But will it improve? I mean, that's a question for your own, personal palate.
Yeah. And I think it's a great way to think about wine because, to me, you like to have a bottle for a little while. If you like them, you buy a few, you want to have them to drink them. But understanding that certain bottles you can drink because it's not changing. It's lasting, but it's not changing. But then there's other bottles that it's fun to, buy a case of, drink one when you get it, make some notes, and then, maybe a year and a half, 2 years later, drink another one, and then, and just kind of go through that journey with the wine and continue to see and experience how the bottles are changing as they age in your cellar.
Yeah, and that's right. I mean, the only way to do that is to, either have someone with a really deep cellar that you're friends with, or just to do it yourself. I mean, it takes patience. But when I had the fortune, many years ago to be friends and get together with a bunch of people that had, they were a little bit older than me at the time, so they had deeper cellars, and they were pulling out, Brunellos that were 15 years old, or Bordeaux's that were 30 and 40 years old, and it was an eye opener for me. I was like, wow, this is what I can do. This is what my wines can become if I can keep my hands off of them. So in this sense, that's the problem, right? I mean, everything costs money, and you have to be able to, you buy wine and you put it away, but you still have to buy wine to drink, right? I mean, You still need something to drink. I made the comment many times. I go down in my cellar and there's several hundred bottles of wine, and I say to my wife, I got nothing to drink. And she's like, what are you talking about? You've got nothing to drink. There's hundreds of bottles of wine here. And she's like, yeah, but they're not ready. I know what I'm trying to do. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah.
But having said all that, I would much rather catch a wine on the younger side than wait too long and have it just be faded and not very nice.
No, I'm with you there, and I think most people would agree with that.
Yeah. So try them younger and decant them. That's all. See what happens.
Well, okay, that was a great. I just love that when you first told me that, John, about wines. It made me really start to think about what I have in my cellar and kind of what I can drink now and what is changing, what's not changing, and just kind of rethink how I'm approaching my wine. So I just like how you said that. Let's jump into producers now. I mean, we have you have some that you really like. Go ahead and share those with us, and people can make some notes and maybe start looking for some of these. Or let me ask you this. A lot of people think that, you're going to mention some producers, even if they can't find them in their area. Learning on Zoom, all the Zooms that you do, and let me just say that to everybody. Get connected with John on social media. Go to his website and get connected. You are doing some great things with wine producers in Italy where they're coming on a regular basis, not every week, but it's consistently happening where they're coming on and talking about, their wines this year, past year, whatever. It's just great education on these producers. And I think people that aren't as knowledgeable in Italian wines but want to explore and really start to enjoy them, you're providing a great resource to really get in that, not just reading about it from a book, but or watching a YouTube video, but actually getting to hear from the producers themselves what they're actually doing. They get into their library, and they really talk about some cool stuff. Are able to ask questions and do things. So I'm just going to tell people they need to jump on and do that for sure. But when people start thinking about Italian wines, it's like we said it at the beginning. They typically go to Piedmont or Tuscany or somewhere that has that big global reputation and really globally puts out a lot of wines from those regions. Umbria is not one of those. So when you mention these producers, we found out through your Zooms, you can get shipped wine from Italy to your door. I mean, a lot of people think you have to be able to find it in the States, and that's not necessarily true. Now, I might be kind of talking a little bit, correct me, John, if you need to. Are there some rules or parameters that you need to kind of play in? But for the most part, you can get wine from Italy.
I don't know what the parameters are, to be honest with you. And if there are any, they're transparent to me because I just, like you said, they'll ship. Now I've done it, before the pandemic, but now during the pandemic, where these places are, I won't say they're struggling to survive, but they're certainly not flourishing like they be. So they're more than willing to, get some sales any way they can. And I wrote an article about that. It's called. It's on the bottom of my website. It's one of the editor's picks.
It was a great article.
Yeah, the idea was just to bring back, my memories, and that's what it's called. It's called a flood of memories, and there's several ways in there that people can help. But there are a lot of a lot of producers that have e-stores, and some of the ones that don't even have e-stores will just interact with you through email. On March 21st, I'm doing a Zoom with Laura Gray from she's the estate manager of Il Palazzone in Montalcino. They don't have a traditional e-store, but she's putting packages together for the people that attend the call, and she'll just arrange everything via email. They'll send you an invoice. She uses some kind of payment exchange site that I can't remember the name of, but it's similar to PayPal, so it's all secure. There are tons of them. And it's not just the producers. You can search, if you use Wine Searcher, the app or winesearcher.com to look for wines, and you filter on not the U.S. but just the worldwide. You'll find Italian Enoteca that come up. A lot of them will do worldwide delivery. Now, see, you have to look. Some of them, the shipping can be ridiculous, but
hey, go in with some friends, right?
Yeah, you can do that. You can split, or you can, you kind of have to know what you're buying, because there are things you can find. The pricing can be very weird. Like, I can find, let's say, a $60 or $70 bottle of Brunello here in the States. I might be able to find it over there for 25 or 30 euro. But sometimes the pricing may be, equivalent. So you have to look what you're buying. But I mean, you can actually save some money, and they're happy to get the sale. So by all means, I would say go for it.
And that would be my first thing is, if you can go through the producer, do that, support them, cut out the middleman, so to speak. You might not be able to all the time because maybe they, but for the most part, if it's a wine a producer has, and they still have some available, go through them. The other reason I like that, John, is I've had a bit of bad luck, not a tremendous amount, but a bit of bad luck of ordering through a wine merchant online and then getting bottles that, I don't know how they were handled, and they ended up not being so good. So I always feel a lot more comfortable when I'm dealing with the producer. I know that they've, handled these wines properly, and they're going to ship them properly. And to the shipping point, I mean, when we were doing the Zooms with you over the summer, if you bought wines, the producers were more than happy to, make that transaction and hold the wines until the temperatures became where they should be to ship them to us. So, I mean, they really work with you and do a good job of servicing you on a wine purchase.
Right. And the last time I ordered, from Daniele from Campo Chiarenti, he told me, he's like, do you want to, here's the two prices for shipping. I can send it by the sea, or I can send it by the air.
Yeah.
He said either way, he goes, if it goes by the sea, he goes, it's going to be refrigerated. I have that worked out. So it's just a matter of, how fast do you want them? What do you want to pay for?
Right.
But, you're 100% right. I mean, think of it when you're paying the shipping, right? Think of that as just a little extra, benefit that you're getting, because you're right. Especially, like, one of the things that these producers have been doing on these calls they've been offering wines from 2010, 2008, 2012, not just the regular wines, but sometimes even the Reserva bottlings. Some of those wines are in such small production, they've never left Italy, but what you said is true. Those wines, they're not, pulling them from some Enoteca in Italy. Those wines have never left the estate. They've never left the wine property. So you're getting perfect provenance.
Yeah.
And that's worth, if you're going to, put these wines away, lay them down in your cellar, that's worth paying for,
Absolutely.
In 10 or 15 years, that's worth paying for.
Yep. Couldn't agree more. All right. So having said all that and saying we can buy from the producers, and that's the way we should, let's jump into producers. You mentioned Antonelli's is the first one you mentioned that you're a fan of.
Yep, I think, in terms of who might be easiest to find in the United States, we could go that route. I mean, Antonelli is one. Arnaldo Capri is another. I love Tabarini, the guy that was on my, Zoom only 2 or 3 weeks ago was the last one we did, I think.
That's right.
And that was great because he has, high Wi-Fi in his wine cellar, and he was able to take us down into the cellar.
How about that cellar? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that cellar was really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, he actually didn't have the greatest connection as he thought he would have because there was a storm, but it still worked out really well. But
and a fun guy. That guy's crazy. I mean, I could see hanging out with him for a few days.
He's nuts. Yeah. He really is. He's hysterical. He's so much fun, but he is like an Energizer bunny, man, and he never turns off. Never.
Yeah.
So let's see. I'm just going to read a quick list. I'm going to repeat a couple because I had these jotted down. So Paolo Bea is one of them, BEA. He makes wonderful wines, a little bit more expensive. His production is smaller. He makes so many nice wines. Colpatrone is another one. Arnaldo Capri, Antonelli, Tabarini, and also there's a winery called Perticaia, Perticaia. Now, what I like about them is Perticaia and Tabarini share the same consulting winemaker or share the same wine consultant. So I find a Perticaia wines to be very nice. And then there's also a wine that had one of their wines, the 2011 Sagrantino was in the Wine Spectator top 100. It was in the top, I want to say top 50 or 40 wines that year. And it's a little bit of a mouthful. It's called Scaccia Diavoli. And let me just see if I can, I know it's Scaccia Diavoli actually means chase away the devil.
Okay.
And it is there's folklore there too, like you wouldn't imagine, because in Bavena, where is one of the communes near Montefalco where the grapes can come from, there was supposedly a witch there.
Really?
Yeah. And they had a local, in as this legend goes, they had brought in a local like shaman or something like that, and to scare this woman away, this witch, and so they did that, and then the winery was formed. So Scaccia Diavoli is spelled SCACCIADIAVOLI. And what's really great about their wines is it's very affordable. You could probably find them for under $40.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's great.
And it's a little more, it's a little more restrained style. So their wines might be, a deep, kind of a garnet or ruby. They may not have the total black color that a lot of other wines have.
This is the first wine where I've heard somebody describe it in a black, John. And I've never had this, so I think I need to wait a few years. I think you would tell me that on this 13, too young to drink right now.
I would say, yeah, it definitely would be. I'm just looking, I don't know, I'm just scrolling my article because I know we talked about that one a little bit before. Oh, who's another one, and this wine is actually really nice as well, is Tenuta Alzatura, Alzatura. And I mentioned that because you'll probably start seeing more of that. That's actually the Cecchi family's winery in Umbria. And that wine is just now being imported through a new U.S. importer with East Coast and Colorado presence. So the distribution there should be a lot better. Okay. And that one is always a Due Bicchieri almost every year. So that will be, I just reviewed the 2012, I believe. It's probably still on the front page of the website if you scroll down. It was that recent. And that was the wine that was sampled to me. So again, almost the current release. The 2013 is about to be released. So this is an interesting quote. I'll just read it because we were talking about Sagrantino. So when I was with Andrea Cecchi once, I asked him, what made you want to leave Tuscany for Umbria and start producing Sagrantino? So he says, Giovanni, I love the challenge, and the Sagrantino grape is not one of the easiest to cultivate. It demands a fertile terrain with good soils. The flowering phase of the vine is the most difficult and delicate part. The vine has a tendency to get jumbled and tangled, and then the plant becomes a perfect site for parasites and fungal disease. For this reason, the shoots have to have ample air circulation, and that is the key. Once the integrity of the plant has been maintained, the Sagrantino grape gives great satisfaction with its incomparable polyphenolic composition, but it's always starting with the plants.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was, an interesting, take on it. But yeah, we said it starts in the vineyard. So he's boiling the vineyard down to the plant, to the grapevine, to the plant.
And I remember him talking about, learning how to do that properly from his grandfather, and him still doing that same technique today.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. That was a great Zoom. I really enjoyed that guy.
Yeah, I don't want to have to, repeat people, but I think that there are some favorites that people, a lot of my readers and followers kind of like. So I might bring him back again.
I think he'd be worth it. Yeah.
That was a fun Zoom. Yeah. I mean, this is going to be the second time that Laura's coming on March 21st. And then I think on April 11th, I believe, which is a Sunday, if I'm correct, is a new winemaker, the winemaker from Pala, P-A-L-A wines in Sardinia. They're one of the largest producers in Sardinia, and he makes great wine. He'll be on April 11th.
And here's what I like about your Zooms now. We get an extra hour. I mean, we get daylight savings, so it's going to be 1 my time, 2 your time.
Yeah, just 1. And then once Italy changes, it'll go back to normal.
Right. But for a little while, I feel a little more comfortable drinking a glass of wine at 1 than I did at, getting on at 1:45 or, right at noon. So.
Yeah.
But, okay, John, if somebody were going to say, okay, look, this has been a great podcast. I'm digging, hearing about these Sagrantino wines, and I want to try one. But we just talked about, what's the age on these, because they need to age for a while, that you can drink. If somebody were going to look to a producer and try to purchase one that they could take home, cook that big, nice piece of meat, and have this wine with it, what would be, don't get one any older than 2000 and what would you suggest?
Look for one older at retail?
Yeah, if you were going to say, Rob, yours is a 13, if you're going to drink one, get a 2010 or 2008, or what year would you say, don't drink it until it's aged at least how many years?
I think, again, with the characteristics of the vintage, you could probably do well enough with a 2011. Those were a little more fleshy with the fruit. Again, I would still decant it for a good, 2 hours.
Okay.
A 2008, if you could find one, would definitely fit the bill. 2010, I wouldn't touch. Just think of that like Brunello's. That is a big, structured, bold vintage. I think I would let that lie. And if they want to start, I would always say, pick up a Montefalco Rosso and, just see what you think of it. It's not going to be, it'll taste like a Sangiovese, but it'll be different. It'll have a little more heft to it. And those wines, they shouldn't be any more than, 18 to maybe $23, $24. That would be on the eye.
Well, it sounds like we need to try both of them, and that's what I'm going to do. But I'm asking for the listeners, but I'm also asking for me, because looking at this region and talking to you about doing a show on them, I definitely wanted to try it. And when I saw this was a 13, in my mind I went, I can drink that. But now I'm finding out that I need to wait a little while, and I'll continue to look for something a little bit older so I can, because I'm anxious to try this wine. I mean, hearing the cool things about it, I'm anxious to try it. So anyway, you're helping the listeners and you're helping me, John. I appreciate it.
There you go.
Well, thanks, man. This has been a fun show. Anything that you want to sum up Umbria about? I mean, obviously, let me ask you this. People go to Italy, they always want to go to Tuscany, Venice. They want to maybe get up north a little bit into Piedmont. Would you say, at some point, Umbria is definitely worth visiting?
Oh, absolutely. I
Okay.
mean, you know what? I think Umbria kind of puts you in the bucket of, a smart traveler, because like what you just said, most people don't want to go to Italy, right? And I try to tell people this all the time, because I say to them, okay, this is the first time you're going to Italy. And they say, yes. And I say, okay, I guarantee you're going to love it. And I guarantee you're going to go back. So I'm not going to advise you to go Rome, Florence, Venice. That's what a lot of people want to do. And they're going, oh, we're going to go for 10 days. I'm going to say, well, you're going to spend 2 days traveling, by train or by air. Resign yourself to the fact that you will go back and shorten down your trip. And I tell them, I'm like, you wouldn't spend 10 days in the United States and go from New York to Miami, Dallas, and LA in 10 days. Why do that in Italy? And who knows where we're going to be when all this ends. I think, travel will probably be expensive. It'll probably tick up like crazy before it levels off. But if you're in Umbria, and like I said, I would challenge someone to be dropped, from outer space into Umbria and tell me that you think you're not in Tuscany. Montefalco is a great hill town. Perugia, where they have the Perugina candy factory, and there's a university there. That is a great, great town there's the old side of it, but there's also the more modern side of it where, jazz music and lots of bars and restaurants. And then you have, for people who are into it beyond the historical aspect, for Roman Catholics, you have Assisi there where St. Francis is. I mean, and that is like a pilgrimage in itself. It's really something spectacular to see. And when I went to Assisi, I said it was literally the only town in Italy where I walked up to get into and walked up to get out. There's only one way in and one way out, but the city is kind of is on a hill. It's shaped like a bell curve, sort of. So when you go up the one side of it, you actually leave the parking lot where you park. There's actually escalators. It's the wildest thing, because the escalators are carved into the side of these like stony mountains. So you just go up the escalator. You don't have a clue where the hell you're going. And the escalator ends, on this cobblestone path, and you walk right up into one of the main streets. And as you're just walking, you're going uphill the entire time. And when you get to the crest of the hill, there's still so much more to see. So then you start going down the hill. And when you say, okay, now we're going to leave, you have to walk uphill again. But it's a super, super steep town. And there's so many, great places there to see. And the little towns, like I mentioned when we started, the Castiglione del Lago, you can't get more charming than that place. Really can't.
Now, when people think about food, and I know, I was going to ask you, they have great food there, but they have great food all over Italy. But when you think about dishes, you think about Tuscany for a certain type of food. You think about Rome for their type of food and thing. Is there more similar to, I'm guessing, Tuscan-style dishes and things like that?
It is. It's very similar.
Okay.
The pasta is very similar. Like I said, you might find, the truffles in it a little more in what you have. And then, Castiglione del Lago is on Lago Trasimeno. Trasimeno Lake is one of the largest in Italy. So around that area, there's a lot of seafood, a lot of, the lake gives a lot of food. That's where it's a little, damper. You get the bean cultivation there. But everywhere we went there, it was trout from the lake. All kinds of fish come out of that lake, and it's everywhere.
Well, John, this has been a lot of fun talking about Umbria, and like my wines that I like to find those small boutique type of wineries, not the mass-produced wines, and finding these types of small areas that produce fantastic wines, I think is a a great journey as well to look for those kind of places that are kind of hidden somewhat and just not as well known. And I think being able to expose people to these places and let them try something new, experience something different, which are still some fantastic wines. I think those of us who love wine and kind of down that rabbit hole, these are the things that we're looking for.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, this has been a lot of fun, John. Thanks for coming on.
Always is.
So I don't know. I don't think we can drop a tease, but we will have you back on, do some more. I would like to do the Vino Nobile as our next podcast, just to let people know that'll be coming out.
That's a great subject to do, and I've got a multi-part article coming out right now about those wines, so it'll dovetail nicely with that.
Okay, perfect. That'll be our next show, and looking forward to doing that. John, thanks again for coming on. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Food, Wine, and Whiskey in Your Own Backyard. And until our next episode, enjoy your next pour.